Welcome to the April 1st Town Board meeting. Kathy has a brief discussion on fair housing presentation, or a little presentation for us.
Yes. We actually had somebody from the Niagara Community Action Program that was going to speak tonight, and they had to reschedule, so they will be here on April 15th at our next board meeting. But the town of Wheatfield did adopt a resolution several years ago, and April is Fair Housing Month in the town. So there's information on fair housing, and our town code and information is available at my office out on the front table. And there will be information on our website, and we will have a speaker at the April 15th meeting. That's it.
Thank you, Kathy. There's a public hearing tonight to discuss proposed telecommunications law. Drew, would you like to speak with us briefly?
And I have Zachary Carr with me. He was on the committee that helped work on this law. Just a brief introduction. The FCC made a ruling on proposed small cells. Small cells are not like your normal cell towers that you see everywhere. They're smaller type units that are put up on poles, usually 50 feet or less. So the federal government went out and passed a law as of January of 2019 saying that towns can regulate these things, but limited how they can regulate. Like they do everything, they hate when they limit what you can do. You can regulate, but you limit it. So we put together a law. The law is about a 9-page law that basically determines how these structures can be placed within the town. What we prefer is that they go on existing structures, on light poles, on power poles, etc. They can put these units on the top of them, and they service the general public. If you want to put up a new pole, we're going to have regulations that you have to do it in a certain way. They have to look a certain way. Aesthetics, you're allowed to make rules about aesthetics, so we put some aesthetic requirements in there, and we put a process. You have to go through site plan approval. But these are going to need to be in place because over the next couple of years, whether it's 6 months from now or a year from now, this is the new wave of technology that's coming. A lot of it is for 5G, but some of it services 4G networks. So these are things to help people get better reception on all their devices. It's actually to serve those devices. Unlike cell towers, the biggest difference is cell towers, they have to prove the need. They have to go out there and say, hey, there's a gap in our coverage. This is not about gaps in coverage. This is just servicing people. There's no proof of that you need these or whatever. It's basically companies that come in and want to build these to service their customers. So that's my presentation. The law is online. I do have a couple extra copies if anybody's interested in reading the law. Like with any public hearing, we're going to get comments and make some small revisions. A couple of the councilmen, Larry's provided some comments. We've made a couple small revisions to that law, just clarifying some things about that. But the hopes are is the town's going to adopt this law 2 weeks from tonight.
I guess the only thing I would say, Drew, we should have some copies of the law available for residents to read at the town clerk's office so they can come in and pick them up. On the average, the size of these telecommunications units, what are we looking at size-wise? Just curiosity.
Well, the law, as I said, first of all, the issue of the pole. They have to be on poles less than 50 feet in height. Anything over 50 feet is your normal cell tower. So the federal government defines them as 50 feet or less. We believe things less than 35 feet, your standard light poles and whatever, are something that will allow actually through an administrative approval process. If you go over 35 feet, up to 50 feet, we think that's going to require, we require site plan approval. The actual antennas, and they're really not antennas, they're really cone devices that probably aren't much bigger than this chair that sit on the top of poles. And we have a whole bunch of, I have copies for the town clerk and whatever, samples of what these things look like. And that's what we're trying to say. Some of them look better than others. We want the ones that look nicer and blend into the pole and don't stand out.
We had Verizon come in and talk to us, and they've come down quite a bit in size. I don't think the average person would even notice that they've gone up. But the law is meant to allow the town to be able to control some of the aesthetic features. So color, we don't want anything too crazy. The distance that you can put them apart from one another. And also it allows us to charge a fee if we should so desire as part of it.
Now, that fee schedule, I know that we have fee schedules for the building department and other things that can we include that in our schedule of fees, Matt? I guess I should ask you.
Well, I think Julie has prepared a special fee resolution for fee schedule, and it's in place now, the fee schedule. We can adjust the fee, fee schedule proposed along with the
Right. You typically don't want to include fees in your local laws because you can, as you do here, you can adjust them or whatever. You probably aren't going to be able to adjust them for at least a little bit because the federal government actually stepped in and said, this is what you can charge and not charge. So it is very interesting. It's the first time the federal government actually stepped in and said, this is what you can charge for these, for review. It's like $500 or $1,000, and there's some add-ons if you have multiple units.
But we can include them in our schedule of fees,
Right.
which is great.
The other thing the town's going to have to look at is a lot of times they want to put these poles up and other facilities within road right-of-ways and whatever, so you're going to have to work on your agreement where if a company wants to come to you, they're going to have to get an agreement with the town on how to fill these, et cetera, and go through the approval process.
Okay.
Oh, yes, and the federal government tells you how much you can lease those sites for. There was a lot of places out there that started to come up with very high fees, and the federal government stepped in and said if you're going to license these areas, not only can you license actual town property, but say the site is off of a town road but onto private property or another easement, you can also charge a fee for going through your easement so to get to and maintain that structure. So I've sent two samples that were provided by Verizon, so you guys should look at them, and again, you have to adopt them with your law, but look at those and amend those to match the town's needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I had a couple. We can post this definitely to our website so that people can get it off of there. They also said you can connect these to buildings. Like they specifically said like water towers or
Yep.
tanks. And,
These could go on the top of the town hall.
and it's all wireless, so you're going to be able to get it with your cell phone or a MiFi card, but they're not going to be putting wire from the telephone pole into your house like Spectrum does, or if you have Verizon DSL.
The weird part about this, though, is that it's wireless for you to connect to it, but the wires actually go down into the system. They are not. It's not like cell towers, which transmit from one cell tower to the next. These actually go down and into a system. It's
and
really
they say that there's like a little house or a hut or something and we can charge a fee for, and maybe if they need, every mile they have to put one of these little houses up to, terminate all the wires.
Yeah, the technology is changing so quickly. Zachary knows that. It's tough to set up laws when the technology is changing so quickly. But the federal government said we could do it, so we're setting up the laws on those guidelines right now.
And the federal government's telling us we can't stop them from doing it. We can only control them a little bit.
Correct. Correct. I mean, the federal government's decided that we all need our cell phones and connection to devices, so they're saying, yes, we need these, so you need to allow them, and here's some rules, some limitations of how you can control them.
Drew, I had one other question. I understand the county has to approve it prior to us approving the law on the 15th. Is that correct?
Like any local law that affects, and I talked to Amy Fisk, it affects the entire town. That means that it abuts another municipality, so therefore it has to go to the county planning board. The county planning board is meeting on the 8th. They actually had their schedule pushed up. We lucked out, so they're going to meet on the 8th.
Hopefully we'll have that approval then. Huh?
Yes. You'll be able to make a decision at your next board meeting. You have to make a secret decision on adoption of the local law. And I probably would recommend pass the fee structure by resolution that night also. Well, that's a fee structure for your applications. I'm going to give you samples of the license agreement. Those would only come in place if they're going to license town property or have to go through your right-of-way or whatever. And you should have those available and get those ready for if an applicant comes in and wants to use town property, which you have the right to say no. You realize they can't force you to use town property, but also or your right-of-way. But if they need to go through your right-of-way to get to say a pole by your power company or whatever, and they have to go through your right-of-way, you could have an agreement for that and charge a reasonable fee to access your right-of-way.
Anybody have anything for Drew? Anyone else? Anybody in the audience have any questions or comments? Yes, Paul. If it's in your right-of-way,
you have the ability to negotiate that, and you actually can say no if it doesn't go in that right way. That's my understanding, but please, the town attorney, this is a brand new law. It's going to be tested by the courts of where you can say no and not say no. My understanding is they will come in to negotiate. They've already done this in other communities, and they couldn't reach deals to put those in the communities right away. So then they went to their alternative and went to different locations for those. So again, you could say no through the negotiation of your deal with them that you're
Where
not.
does National Grid have their telephone poles now?
They're in a right of way, but you can't regulate, you can't stop them.
Right.
It's public utility.
Right, and they're not a public utility. They're a quasi-public utility or something like that. It's
So
kind
we
of.
can say no, they can't go on our right of way.
I'm saying for now, you could probably say no to that negotiation. They would come in and offer to build them in your right of way, and then you would say, hey, we can't come to agreement. It doesn't look good. We don't want it on this street this way, etc. And I guess you could say no. Again, the courts haven't ruled on that, but my understanding is they have to negotiate agreement with you.
I mean, I realize they try to use different telephone poles, and what I've seen on the pictures and stuff like that, but if they start popping more poles on my right of way,
Right.
what happens when the car hits that pole? Do you allow
Correct.
that to be on
Well,
my
that's
right
why
of way?
you have to have agreements and insurances and all those other things if you were going to allow it. This came to light last year, end of last year in the town of Amherst. I think there were about 30 of them proposed on some private subdivision roads, cul-de-sacs and whatever.
I'd rather not see it on our right of way than some stuff going on there now, too.
Well, we'll have to take it as it comes, I think, Paul.
I mean, you gotta keep in mind where it's still a growing town. If you start popping poles in next to my road, and you gotta widen the road, you're gonna have to pay to get it widened, or get the poles moved, they aren't gonna say they're gonna do it for now.
Well, that would be in your agreement. You would definitely negotiate the fact that, right, well, you'd have to work on your own agreement. You would say in your agreement that if the pole has to be moved, that that's your cost. We're not gonna pay for that pole to be moved.
Do we have to put that language in before the 15th?
No, that's gonna be your agreement language or whatever, but I would try to put that together, in the next few months, just to have something ready. Otherwise, you're gonna be, when they come in, say they come in on the 16th and say, we wanna put poles up in your town road right away, you would basically work on an agreement with that, and instead of starting from scratch, that's something that works out. But those are the things you would have in that agreement, about insurances, about removals, about all those things. And I've seen them in their sample agreement, they actually talk about that it would be no cost to the municipality. Obviously, to sell to the municipality, they're gonna say there's no cost to them.
When you say there's wires that come down from it,
Yep.
is that only when there's underground electricity, or?
No, that's my understanding, and Kurt, you were at that presentation, they actually connect into fiber and other things and whatever. So it's not a transmit from one to the other, it's then into the network.
One of the things something to do with something go belly up and then something on the pole.
Yes, and that's in the law, and it's in the agreement that they have to postpone or remove anything if they go and remove, just like we do with cell towers now. You gotta remove it if you go out of business or don't use it, so. Right. There's only a few that have done it. I know Hamburg, I work with Hamburg adopted. Amherst is still working on theirs. They adopted one, but my understanding, and don't quote me, they were working on a revision to that. But everybody's under this kind of April 15th deadline, which is when the telecom law went into effect at the beginning of the year, they basically gave communities about 90 days or so to say, look, we don't want to rush of people to run in and make application because, you don't have any laws about it. They gave the communities 90 or 120 days to put those laws in effect. So no, there wouldn't be a big rush to come in and say, we beat before you put a law in effect. So the federal government at least was nice there and said, we'll give some time period. Supervisor?
Yes.
Drew, I have a question. Wouldn't they have to get an easement from National Grid to go on these poles?
Yeah, that would have to be an agreement with them.
Now, you're saying they're going to go underground, but they're stringing from pole to pole.
What I've heard from a lot of the poles is that I've asked them, what I've seen is that for a pole, they usually have to replace the pole. They come in and negotiate agreement with National Grid or NYSEG or whoever the provider is. They replace the pole with a more structurally sound pole, so the pole not only supports whatever's there, the power, but also puts food into it on top of it. They prefer, obviously, like light poles and things like that are easier to work with in the right of way of the road.
Now, you're saying they're going to go underground, but typically Verizon goes pole to pole. So would they string it below spectrum?
Don't know. I've seen that. I don't know how they run that.
They would probably, depending on who they are, propose it differently.
Because once they get into that, then you're into their other utility laws where they can run lines like that, et cetera, or whatever. This is about the installation of the antennas themselves. Unfortunately, I don't know. Zachary knows a little bit more about the actual workings of once they receive the signal.
So I guess the antennas themselves, if it's a 5G antenna, it's typically they just put up a standard and there's no wires that are connected to it. 4G might be a little different because it requires an electronics box as well as a small antenna. So there may be some wires, but the 5G service is basically allowing Verizon to utilize the full bandwidth of their fiber capabilities. So right now, typical wireless service can't transmit as much data as the Wi-Fi, for example, in your house would allow. But the fiber can carry much more data. 5G service allows Verizon to open that up, so it opens up other wavelengths, so they can transmit more data to power devices that will eventually be able to talk directly to these poles. So I just bought a smart oven. So your oven, your cell phone, your television set, those kind of devices that they're trying to target.
Your Ring doorbell?
Your doorbell, yeah. Eventually, you're just not going to be able to support the bandwidth of all the information that needs to be transmitted from these devices to the internet, and that's what these 5G devices in particular allow for.
I had a question on co-location. They said they were trying to encourage it, but if each one of these antennas is like the size of a bread box, I can't envision 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these bread boxes being on one pole.
Well, so I guess the nice thing is that a lot of these smart poles, and we have some language in there that encourages the use of smart poles. A smart pole is a pole that might have LED lighting and your cell antennas plus maybe battery backup. In a big city, you might have charging stations for your cell phones or for electric vehicles. But the poles are built to accept multiple antennas. So if Verizon and AT&T are both using the same technology, there may be multiple locations available on that pole for them to place antennas right from the get-go.
We're getting so small now. When I first saw this, I keep envisioning the normal cell tower array. They're not arrays, they're just little things that go in there. It's like somebody just put another one off to the side, and we're encouraging that. Obviously, if someone comes in and says, I want to build a new pole, and there's already a pole 100 feet away, the law says you got to consider going on that pole. Here's why you can't go on that pole. And they don't want to build new poles. Obviously, they would like to go on existing poles. The poles already have power and other things too.
Radio signal for a 5G signal is frequent and travel. It's blocked by trees, windows, and other things. Requiring poles to be 5 height to limit their coverage. Limiting the height of it to limit how far they can travel if needed to get to it. If something needs to be in that pole and there's enough efficiency or efficiency to get to it, then let's put another pole. If they're worried about how they look, by limiting the height, we're increasing the quantity of poles. Reducing the premium from an antenna also reduces the quality. Premium antenna does not perform any good more good than an RF premium antenna. So by limiting it to something that looks nice, giving us more antenna sites because the coverage is really good. Wheatfield right now, we're lucky enough to get SIOS for internet. We cannot get SIOS TV. Wheatfield does not permit Verizon to offer that. It needs spectrum as an operator on the wireless TV service area. I think it's credit to being with Verizon to also allow them to bring TV service to SIOS. So it increases competition and brings prices down for residents. National legislative fee structure should be zero. We charge Verizon a fee, and Verizon turns around and comes back, I pay it. I don't want to pay any more than I have to. We don't need the fees for these tolls. They're going to increase a lot of costs, and the cost that they put in the system benefits the residents. It makes Wheatfield a better place to live. by making fees and other costs, you might make some sense, well, I won't do this, I won't do that, and do that. Not so good a signal, not so good of a system, and a lot of people are can't, they don't tell you what you got, why would you want to do that? If you put the lots of put antennas where they need them, technically need them, where they work the best, where they cover what they're supposed to, and not have to worry about, oh, I gotta pay another $1,000, whatever a year, when it's technically needed, but they're not doing it. I think the fees come back to me directly as a cost to the town. So it's a big deal.
The only thing about fees,
That's a good point, though. That's a very good
for
point.
all of you to charge the same.
We don't have to, though. We're not everybody else.
No, but we,
ourselves illegal.
you know, I think you made some good points. I would say this, that we still have to cover, I mean, Wheatfield has to cover our administration fees. They should still issue permits. I don't know what the fee structures are. I haven't looked at it yet, but I will look at it. And I would suggest that the town board looks at minimizing the fees. We're not here to make money. And you're right, it'll come out of the taxpayers somewhere along the line. So, again, without looking at it, I really can't comment it, but that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to clarify, there is no arrangement with Verizon. It could be literally 5 to 10 years before this actually comes to fruition. What we're doing is trying to think ahead and make sure that if somebody does approach us, that we have, you know, some structure on the book so that we're not, you know, caught flat-footed. Right now, there's no communities in Erie County or Niagara County that have been, well, Buffalo. The city of Buffalo has been approached, and they're working on it, but that's the closest they've come to the area, and that's, nothing's in written here.
Can I ask, where did the April 15th date come from?
April 15th date, so that, Drew, you were saying that there actually was something with the, I forget what you were saying exactly, the April 15th date?
Right, in the Federal Telecommunications Act, they wanted to give communities, so they passed this law, and they said to communities, look, we'll give, so, realize what happened, they passed this law in whatever it was January, all these companies would rush in, and none of the communities would have laws to regulate them, so they gave the communities, whatever it was, 90 or 120 days, which comes to that April 15th, 16th deadline. Everybody's throwing that out. That was just giving the communities the ability, so people, that if a cell tower company or a phone cell company came in February, you could say, no, we're allowed through April 15th to set our laws up for you. Otherwise, you get a rush of people. They have a little piece. I'm going to go in before I put anything laws up. So the federal government at least said, hey, we'll give you this time to put those laws in place.
Thank you, Drew.
I have for the town clerk and present the copies to the office, to the public, and then the copy of the law, and the supervisor gets
Thank you.
copies of the revisions and some samples of what the instructions are going to look like. And so if you want to make any comments on, we're allowed to regulate the aesthetic of them, you know, and they gave us samples of what is allowed, and we have those samples. So without, we're not thinking arbitrarily, we're just saying from an aesthetic standpoint, we need to meet these kind of things that companies are throwing at the area.
Thank you, Drew.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Motion to close the public hearing?